guys! Welcome to the 21st episode of Zooming In with Gen Z. I'm your host, Haley Taylor Schlitz. Thanks for being here! Before we get started, I wanted to quickly say that we didn't forget about you. Citizen Ed has been revamping and that has put our show on delay, but we are back. I do have some sad news though, folks. This will be our last episode. I have graduation coming up, and then I have to study for the bar over the summer, so wish me luck. So much to catch up on, so much to talk about and appreciate, and perfect timing to bring our interviews back. I can't think of a better way to close since the interview really does connect everything from our first discussions about marketplaces, awesome Gen Zers speaking out and voting, to our later discussions with great trees, pearls of wisdom, guidance, and communication. It's all connected with this interview. And who better than somebody who wrote one of the first books about Gen Z? Now, if you're Gen Z, stop scrolling. You need to hear this news. Just your friendly reminder that things are not back to normal and COVID still exists. The recent variants are still doing lots of damage, so stay safe and stay diligent. Make sure you wear your masks when in big crowds. Don't go inside with big crowds. Just really stay aware of COVID. Just because the restrictions have been let up doesn't mean that COVID has stopped being relentless. A war impacting the world. Even though you may not think about it every day, or it may not be at the top of your news channels anymore, that doesn't mean everything is all better. Please keep this conversation going so we all stay aware and hold others accountable. School is almost out. School is almost out, and this year has been one for the books. It was a challenge of its own and definitely gave 2020-2021 some competition. I hope you all are okay. Take time for yourself and others, but also take time to do some good work and get in some good trouble outside of school. What's on your coffee table? The book of this episode is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Haley Jackson. Hear this quote from Goodreads to learn more. The case is closed. 5 years ago, schoolgirl Andy Bell was murdered by Sal Syme. The police know he did it. Everyone in town knows he did it. But having grown up in the same small town that was consumed by the murder, Pippa Fitzamboni isn't too sure. When she chooses the case as a topic for her final year project, she starts to uncover secrets that someone in town desperately wants to stay hidden. And if the real killer is still out there, how far will they go to keep Pip from the truth? I loved this book. It was all you could hope for in a mystery novel. It had twists and turns, hints and clues. It keeps you guessing and surprised the whole way through. This book is a fantastic read if you want to enjoy something that'll make you think and keep you engaged. Are you watching anything at the moment? Can I give you a movie recommendation for your watch list? Check out Encanto on Disney+. Hear this quote from Google with more info on the movie. The Madrigals are an extraordinary family who live hidden in the mountains of Colombia, in a charmed place called the Encanto. The magic of the Encanto has blessed every child in the family with a unique gift. Every child except Mirabel. However, she soon may be the Madrigal's last hope when she discovers that the magic surrounding the Encanto is now in danger. I know you've heard of this movie, probably have seen it, or at least heard the song We Don't Talk About Bruno on TikTok. And if you have not seen it, I know you want to after all the talk and music. I personally loved this movie. I loved it because of how culturally aware it was. I think Disney did a good job being authentic to the culture and not whitewashing it. This movie is very family-friendly, fun, and meaningful. We just got a new song for our playlist. I know you have heard Fingers Crossed by Lauren Spencer Smith. It is absolutely stunning. Her voice is incredibly smooth, the lyrics are very deep, the melody is stunning, and the song is definitely an earworm. It is the song of the episode because I can't get it out of my head.
Making plans to travel around the world. Said we'd always put each other first.
Let's shift our focus for a minute to some awesome activity on or by Gen Z. This is what our nation's future holds. Mr. John Volpe, the director of polling at the Harvard Institute of Politics, has written the new book, Fight: How Gen Z is Channeling Their Fear and Passion to Save America. This book is the first book that takes a deep and insightful look at us, Generation Z. That's right, he zoomed right in on us. This is incredible. Now, the generations before us are reading this book and learning about who Gen Z is. Each chapter takes a close look at who we are, what we have been through, and what motivates us. They will use this information to plan political campaigns as well as advertising and marketing strategies. They're interested in Gen Z because not only are we the new target audience as we come of age, as we've continuously discussed on this show, but we are the future and hope for America as younger generations are. Hello, Mr. Volpe. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Haley. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
Yes, I'm so excited to have this conversation. Okay. So my first
of all,
question.
of course, call me John, right? Call me John.
Okay,
Yeah.
John. My first question when I first saw the book, like before I had even read it, my first question was, what inspired you to write this book?
You and people like you, kind of have been inspiring me for many years. But to give you some broader context, over 2 decades now, for like longer than you've likely been on this planet, I've been fortunate enough to study young Americans. It started back in 2000 at the Institute of Politics at Harvard, where I started studying the oldest millennials, and now we've been able to kind of study all of them. And now Gen Z is coming of age. And in 2017, 2018, when the oldest Zoomers were kind of turning 18, 19, entering college, the workforce, and voting, I just saw like significant changes in a lot of my research, right? But most importantly, the factor that really was a spark for me to write this book is essentially watching what was happening from 2018 February, Parkland, to 2018 November, the election, and young organizers from Parkland were able to kind of capture the spirit of a generation that transcended left-right traditional politics, and younger people turned out in those midterm elections like they never have before. Young Americans, Gen Zers, literally doubled their participation in the election relative to millennials, Gen Xers, and boomers before that. So that's when I knew attitudes were changing, but more importantly, you guys were backing it up by actually doing what you said you were going to do, which is go out there and vote. So that was a spark. That's when I really started to put the proposal together and to begin to outline and research it.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you said that, because on this show, we're constantly talking about how your vote is your voice and how you need to use it in every single election. So it's so fantastic for me to hear, at least personally. I feel so happy to hear that, we are turning out to vote. And even in studies that you see those statistics, those numbers of young people coming out to vote. That's really important. And I'm glad that message is being communicated to Gen Z. So I'm really glad to hear that. What do you think the importance is of shifting our nation's focus to Gen Z? Like, why should we care? We're still babies.
Well, lots of different reasons, right? Number one is you need to care because Gen Z has done more than, I would argue, most any other kind of demographic or subgroup of America to elect the presidents, right? If Gen Z didn't exist, okay, if the votes of Gen Z weren't counted, whether you like them or not, Joe Biden wouldn't be president today. We'd have a second term of Donald Trump. Okay, so even being so young, this generation, your generation, has had just a tremendous impact on choosing who our president is and our senators as well. It was your generation, Haley, voted for Biden by more than 20 points in these key battleground states. Trump won the election of those over the age of 40, in some cases pretty handily. So it was younger people, specifically the large swath of Gen Z, who again participated in record numbers in the 2020 election. So that's one reason, right? A second reason is you're the most educated, most diverse group of younger Americans in our history. And I argue that if people want to work with you, right, if you want to sell something to you, right, tell a story to you, that they need to like you. You need to like them, that you need to like them, you need to respect them. And it's so important that our other leaders understand your values, where you're coming from, because, you're showing how much clout you have in the ballot box. And every single day, there's more and more economic activity, of course, being driven by Gen Z. And at the end of the book, I talk about, if you want to understand the future, if you want to understand where America is headed, it starts with understanding the values of younger people. So those are some of the reasons why I think it's important.
Absolutely. I second all of that. And anytime I'm talking to somebody who's an older generation than Gen Z, that's what I really try to communicate. That, like this, our point of view is important, just like your point of view, our experiences and our voice is important, just like yours. And those reasons are the exact reasons that I talk about. So I absolutely agree. And I think that's important for Gen Z to hear too, as we're not the youngest generation that America has anymore. We have Gen Alpha now. Yeah. And then as we get older, there's going to be, Generation Beta and Gamma. And we need to keep in mind how we felt when we were young and wanted to be heard, and listen to the younger generation, because that's the only way, like you said, if you want to see where America's headed, if you want to make progress, that the younger generation is the progress. So I absolutely agree. And this is a great, going in a great direction, so that I want to get a tiny bit deeper into what you had written. One of the quotes that you had said in your book that really resonated with me, that I really understood what you were saying, but it did pose a question in my mind. When you say that Gen Z has been failed by our nation, I'm wondering, what do you think of the argument of that's a racially narrow view of our experiences? Do you think that in order for our nation to disappoint us, we must have had expectations to begin with? And as a minority generation, Black and brown children have learned from our families to not expect much from this country, and to understand that there's a lot of work left to do. So almost we were never we're disappointed with the state of the country, but it's not a disappointment that has come from expectations that it was going to be a good country to begin with. What do you think?
Well, I think the fact that the expectations are so low, as you said, is clearly kind of a problem and a challenge that I think Gen Z in particular, with millennials, by the way, and I think the two generations share a lot of the same values, are really taking to heart. I was struck several years ago when we first asked a question in our Harvard polling about whether or not you feel under attack because of the color of your skin, I think was the way that we asked the question. I found that 2/3 of young African Americans under 30, 18 to 29-year-olds, said they feel under attack a lot. 80%, a lot of the time, or some of the time, right? And that, every day, 2 out of 3 people of color feeling that particular way is something that clearly, made me think even, in a different way myself, right? About the legacy that older generations have left, right? And the challenges, not just, that's one example of African-American and Black individuals, right? But that same weight, that people of color carry just because of who they are, right? There are a lot of other similar weights that other groups also carry, through mental health or other kinds of challenges that they have, right? And that's where people are today. But what's so unique, I think, about Gen Z is, as a community together, in most cases, you're kind of building community to go out there and change that, and through the movements and the protests and the organizing that so many folks like yourself have been a part of in the last couple of years.
Absolutely. I think that whether or not it's disappointment or low expectations from the start, it's definitely something that drives Gen Z to work to make change, just like the generations before us and hopefully the generations after us. So I definitely agree with that, but I really appreciated that part of the book, that quote. I found it really interesting, and it had the wheels turning in my head. But speaking of just your book, and, for those who haven't read the book yet, we want them to, so shameless plug, go get the book, and obviously that'll be mentioned in the episode and at the end too, but please go get the book and read it. It's an incredible book. Even if you're not Gen Z, as we've already talked about, it's important to learn about future generations. So but anyway, what is one point that you believe is important for everyone to understand about Gen Z?
Well, I think everyone that's not Gen Z, when I started to talk about the thesis and outline the book over the last, couple of years, I was realizing that so much of what we thought collectively about Gen Z was just wrong, right? Yeah. And it starts with, these myths. Number one, it's you don't vote, younger people, right? That might have been true, for other generations. Not true here. We talked about that already. Another myth is that this is a generation of quote snowflakes. I talked about that in the book, and I think your generation is anything but snowflakes, right? And what I really wanted to convey in this book is that I don't think since the Greatest Generation, in at least 7 or 8 decades, that there's been any generation that's had to deal with more turmoil more quickly at a younger age before the oldest Zoomer actually turned 25 when neuroscience tells us our brains are mature. Than your generation. So it's a couple of decades of trauma and chaos and angst without seeing what America looks like when we're unified. So that's something that I think has begun to resonate with some of the older groups of folks that I've talked to. As a Gen Xer, I remember when we all came together after the Miracle on Ice, or the day after September 11th, or many of these other days of my childhood and young adulthood. Your generation hasn't had that moment yet, and that really has created, just a real, a unique relationship between your generation, other generations, and the country. And it's important for, I think, all of us to understand and appreciate.
Yeah. I really appreciate what you said, especially about the snowflakes part. I'll be on TikTok and I'll see a video that's borderline, maybe shouldn't have been posted, should not have been said. And the comments call the video out, this is inappropriate. This is not okay. Can we stop doing this, or can we normalize that? And there are other comments that'll argue you guys are being snowflakes, one joke can't even be said without you guys breaking down. And I think that it's really important to look at it from the point of view of, this is not being a snowflake. This is just setting our standards higher. No, we're not going to joke about things like that. Okay. And if you think that's a snowflake or it hurts your feelings, then, maybe you're the snowflake, you're so fragile that you can't take somebody calling you out. So I really appreciate that point of view, because I feel like there are quite a few people, like you said, common myths, but there are quite a few people who have that point of view of this generation is a snowflake generation or a weaker generation, or can't handle things like simple jokes that other generations have been able to talk about or handle or whatever. And I think it's really just higher expectations from our generation, within, we're not gonna tolerate that. Not that other generations have, but we're not either. And right. So I really appreciate that conversation too. And I hope that resonates with our viewers, our Gen Z viewers and our older generation viewers. I hope that resonates and that you guys hear that. But we were talking earlier about getting the book, which again, get the book.
It's available everywhere. Yes, thank you.
Available everywhere. Okay, so it's really easy. There's no excuse, get the book. But we were talking about, whether you're Gen Z or older generations, it's important to read books and articles and everything on topics like this. It's really important. For Gen Z, I can imagine that there may be some viewers who are like, why would I get and read this book? I am Gen Z. I don't need to read a book about me. I already know who I am. So can you sales pitch to our Gen Z viewers why they should read your book?
Thank you so much. So I was originally coming at this, Haley, from the perspective of talking to your parents, essentially, right? And other mentors, teachers, coaches, employers, citizens, etc. Okay, that was the original. But as I was kind of getting towards the end of it, I was realizing that this is as much for you and Gen Z as anyone, because you're living what others have called the struggle every day, right? And sometimes it's difficult to see the bigger picture, right? And put this into greater context. And I think what I hope that Gen Z gets out of this is that whatever you're going through, you're not alone, right? So if you're going through anxiety, stress, depression, etc., you're certainly not alone. I talk a lot about this unique set of stressors. And and David Hogg, who wrote from Parkland, who wrote the foreword, talks about some ways of self-care and balance and wellness. That's one part. But regardless of who you are, you've probably accomplished much more than you think, individually or collectively, right? Yeah. And I think that's something that your generation needs to appreciate, because you may clearly not have accomplished all of your personal or goals for the country, but you've made much more progress in a much shorter amount of time than most people understand. and you need to appreciate that and celebrate those little victories. And there's like a chapter on each of those major victories. Not just like showing up to protest something, but influencing the conversation, ultimately influencing laws and regulations across dozens and dozens of cities, states, and in some cases, Congress. So you need to know that you've already been successful so you can continue to stay in that fight.
Exactly. And I hope that resonates with our viewers too. Definitely, sometimes it can feel as you're living in the storm, as you're navigating the jungle, whatever terminology you want to use, whatever phrase you want to use, it gets easy to feel like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, or that all of this you barely made any progress, or that there's no point because this is never going to be like solved or something. And I think that it's really good to read about what has been accomplished so far, to keep you motivated to keep doing what you've been doing, keep on keeping on. I think that's really valuable, and I think it's really valuable for Gen Z to see what other generations are thinking about and talking about when it comes to us, because it's important for the older generations to talk to and understand the younger generations, because this is your legacy. This is who's going to continue on America, and as the younger generations keep coming, that's going to be continuously true. But also the younger generations need to understand history, otherwise it's going to repeat itself. So to understand what other generations are talking about, how they see us, and if there's something that we don't like, for example, how would you know how you're being portrayed to other people if you don't talk to them and if you don't read what they're saying? So I think that there's a lot of knowledge to be handed around. I really appreciate that. And of course, to be sensitive to your time, although I could keep talking for hours, I have one more question for you. Sure. So you said that you're a Gen Xer, and I know that you had said at the beginning that the studies that you're doing show a significant difference in just ideology, or maybe turnout for younger generations like Gen Z and millennials rather than the older generations. I'm wondering, in your studies, did you see any similarities between Gen X and Gen Z?
Between Gen X and Gen Z, so essentially the parents of Gen Z.
Yes.
It's the first time I've been asked that question, Haley. It's a really great question. So listen, clearly there are similarities, right? Because we collectively are your parents, right? We've had like a tremendous amount of influence, right? Yes. And I think that in many ways it's kind of connected to like the approach of values and empathy, and in a sense of justice that like we as parents try to try to kind of teach. So that part of the values and the attributes are kind of what is aligned. Politically, though, we vote very differently the way you vote. Gen X is a relatively small generation. We were influenced, positive or negatively from Reagan, really. It was the biggest, but the fall of ultimately, right, the fall of the Berlin Wall, then the Cold War, et cetera. And we are very much a kind of a 50-50, the way in which we vote, right? Very much 50-50. Older, your grandparents, baby boomers, more likely to vote Republican. We're 50-50, whereas millennials and Gen Zers are much more like a 60-40, two-thirds round trip. So, but those values of justice and empathy, I think that are the ones that can connect the Gen X and the Gen Z.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I love thinking about the generational connects on how it's, Gen X and Gen Z, and then millennials had Gen Alpha. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Gen Alpha gets raised based on this new studies and statistics that you found on how millennials think, and how that is conveyed to Gen Alpha and what they think and how active they are and where they stand and who they are as a generation. I really like thinking about generational connections like that. And I see exactly what you're saying is exactly what I saw too. And ideology being handed down for generations in some regards, and in other regards, a generation is its own, like your children are their own people. And even though they're going to have some similarities to you and being raised by you, of course, they're going to have their own thoughts and ideas. And Gen Z, especially with technology being one of the first generations that really grew up in a world of technology, we are more able to influence ourselves. So being able to share knowledge across platforms, and I can hear what somebody across the world who's also Gen Z is saying, and I have a different point of view on the world, being able to in real time communicate with people who are in the UK, for example. And I can get that, like talking to them, understanding what they're going through in a way that maybe was not available to even millennials, being able to talk in real time about news that's happening rather than just seeing it on TV,
Right.
maybe even days later. You get to talk about it in real time to the people that are experiencing it. And that obviously also has an impact on what a generation thinks. So I really think that technology plays a role too in the differences between us and our parents. But of course, our parents did give us the foundational justice and empathy. So I like these generational connections. I like talking about it. But like I said, I guess we'll stop there if we have to. But I just want to take a moment to thank you for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I really hope that our viewers enjoyed it as much as I did.
I really appreciate you having me, Haley, and hopefully we can do it again if you haven't.
Yes. A big thank you to Mr. Volpe for taking time to talk with us. I had such a great time, and I hope you all loved it like I did. What a wonderful interview to circle back to where we began with our action and motivation. We always discussed how history has its eyes on us, and so do other generations. And we then moved into great trees, and what a fantastic generational connector. What a fantastic interview. Thank you again, Mr. Volpe. Next in line is our Zooming In segment. Let's take a look at who's being magnified for being magnificent. Judge Brown Jackson is the first Black woman to be on the United States Supreme Court. How inspiring. When you read about the life journey of Judge Brown Jackson, you see that she is a trailblazer that has helped create positive change in our society. Judge Brown Jackson has all the qualifications that if she was a white man would have likely put her on the Supreme Court earlier in her life. She attended and graduated from Harvard University for both undergrad and law school. She was an editor for the Harvard Law Review. She served as a clerk for Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. President Obama appointed her to serve as judge for the United States District Court of the District of Columbia in 2013 and was confirmed with bipartisan support by a simple voice vote of the United States Senate. It is not often that we get these global historic moments. You know those moments where every Black girl in our nation will take a second to stop and look at an image on the screen? We will stop because it was a Black woman we see. The headlines and social media posts with those images will share with the world the historic decision by President Biden to nominate U.S. Courts of Appeals for the District of Columbia Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to become the first Black woman to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. What an incredible moment this is for us, and it has to be celebrated. Your Zoom call to action, you may be wondering? First, buy and amplify the book Fight. Support Mr. Volpe and other authors of important conversations and use the book as a tool to communicate and an opportunity to engage with the generations who came before us, whose eyes are now on us. Second, celebrate this moment. Post, like, share, comment, follow, subscribe, talk about, and get inspired by this moment in history. Judge Brown Jackson is a role model and a trailblazer. Take a moment to really appreciate the gravity of this historic moment in history. What a long fight it has been to reach this point. We stand on the shoulders of great trees. That's all, folks. Episode 21 and our last episode of Zooming In with Gen Z is all wrapped up. Thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I've learned so much, stayed so inspired, and enjoyed every moment of this, and I hope you have too. Keep working, keep voting, keep learning, keep doing your awesome Gen Z thing.